Hello and welcome. I was born in 1979 and I grew up in the 80s and the 90s, before the internet was a part of our everyday lives, which was around 1995. But I was shocked to learn that today's teens refer to that period as the 1900s. Way to make us sound old. There is a huge difference between 1910 and 1980. But kids today don't see it that way. It's all pre internet and pre smartphones to them. And these little Zoomers ask me the question, how did we even survive before the internet? So let's have a look together at life before apps, before social media, before Amazon one day delivery. Okay, first off, when we talk about the 80s and definitely the 90s, there were computers and the internet. It just wasn't any good for everyday life yet. In offices around the world, it may have meant a little less paper storage because now you could store information on a computer. But it was still a world of paperwork and paper storage. Lots of filing cabinets. Some big companies would have whole rooms, even a floor of a building dedicated to paper storage. And who remembers these envelopes? This was before email, so if you needed to send a memo to everyone in the office or have something reviewed, this is how it got passed around from desk to desk. If you wanted to buy or sell something back then, instead of Facebook Marketplace, you would place an ad in the local newspaper or put a note up on the notice board at the local shops or the library. Let's look at how kids could possibly survive in this pre-internet world and see if I can answer some of these questions that I get asked. First off, we were alone a lot, but we were never bored. In a lot of families, both parents worked full-time hours, and so if you were deemed old enough, you were probably left alone for a few hours until the parents came home from work. You might even be responsible for your younger siblings. Just like kids today, we spent a lot of time in our own rooms. That is sacred space if you're a teenager. Your own little world. I would spend a lot of time in my room decorating the walls with posters, dancing around to the latest pop songs, or singing into my hairbrush in front of the mirror. Different families would have different rules. For us, we wouldn't do our homework or household chores until our parents came home and forced us to do it. Until then, you might go for a ride on your bike or skateboard. Play basketball. These hoops attached to garages were a common sight in the 80s. Jump on the trampoline if you were lucky enough to have one. These seem to be a lot more common these days. Back then, I assume they were more expensive, and they were certainly heavier, and there was no safety net and no covering the springs. Many of us will remember the pain of falling onto those trampoline springs. Back inside the house, when we were young, we would play with our toys. I remember my brother and I playing marbles down the hallway of the house, or building racetracks, or playing with Lego. In our house, you weren't meant to watch television until after dinner. But if you had a babysitter looking after you, you might find yourself watching Days of Our Lives or The Young and the Restless. Afternoons were also when you would get reruns of shows like Hogan's Heroes and The Brady Bunch. Some television stations may have shown cartoons in the afternoon as well. I'm pretty sure afternoons was when my favourite show, Punky Brewster, was on. And does anybody remember watching You Can't Do That on television? It was an early kids variety show where people got slimed if they said the word slime, and there seemed to be an awful lot of tying the kids up and handcuffing them to walls. Let me know in the comments what you were watching after school as a kid. After dinner, we would all watch television together as a family. My main memories were Family Ties, Growing Pains, The Muppet Show, and MacGyver. One thing we did more of back then is read. Books were a big part of our lives, but we read everything. Instead of looking at your phone over breakfast, you read the cereal box, the milk carton, the instruction manual for the new VCR, comic books or the comics in the newspaper. Or if you had a set of Childcraft encyclopedias on hand, then there was always something new to read. The 80s was a great time for books. My parents credit Roald Dahl's Dirty Rhymes and Dirty Beasts with getting us kids into reading. We had Roald Dahl books, the BFG, The Witches, and Matilda came out in the 80s. There was The Babysitter's Club, Sweet Valley High and Sweet Valley Twins. Choose Your Own Adventure books were always exciting because they could be read several times and get different outcomes. Tintin and Calvin and Hobbes were also popular in our house. If you were older, you might have read Anne Rice's Interview with a Vampire series, Clan of the Cave Bear, and this was also a huge time for Stephen King and Dean Koontz. I was reading Mills and Boons, loads of them, but as Mum would say, at least I was reading books. Computer games. We did have computer games in the 80s. Nintendo Game & Watch came out in 1980. They were single-game handheld devices. Then in 1983, we got the Nintendo Entertainment System 8-bit home console. And the Game Boy came out in 1989, which was a handheld multi-game device. I remember playing the DOS game Castle on our first home computer. It looked like this, and you had to type in commands like turn right or look desk, and it would be all, I don't see a desk. It was pretty slow and boring and not a great introduction to computer games. In 1985, school kids got the joy of the Oregon Trail, where you were likely to die of dysentery before you got to the end. Most kids in the 80s had some sort of household chores. My brother had to mow the lawn and rake up the leaves. I had to do the dishes, and cleaning my room was constantly at the top of the to-do list because I wasn't very good at doing it. My best friend in school had to wash, hang up, and iron and fold the laundry for the whole family. Homework was a little slower because we had to look things up the old-fashioned way, using encyclopedias or even going to the library. In school, there was a mix of manual typewriters, electric typewriters, and early computers, depending on where you were and what year it was. In the 80s, I had a manual typewriter at home, and later we got a home computer, I think around 1990. I would say my homework was handwritten right up until I left school in 1995. To keep all those pages together, you'd have several of these bulky foolscap files, or the super styling Trapper Keeper. These came in all sorts of cool designs, so you could get the one that suited you best. When I see groups of kids together these days, it seems it's all about sharing and watching TikTok videos. Back in my day, we went and rented movies from Blockbuster, got all the candy that we were allowed to buy, and then we watched the movies, learnt how to moonwalk, played Truth or Dare, played board games, and we talked. We talked about what life might be like when we grew up. We did this thing called talking to each other. To be fair, I think a lot of families often ate dinner in front of the television. I don't really even ever remember being bored. If we ran out of things to do, we would play cards a lot. Or we could see who could throw a stone into a can or come up with some new game. If we ran out of things to talk about, we would play the alphabet game, where you have to name all the bands or all the movie stars that start with the letter A, and then all the Bs, and so on. I friggin' love that game. Dangerous? No. We just didn't think about it. There were payphones if you got into trouble, and back in those days, people would stop and help if, say, your car broke down on the side of the road. Sure, we might have done some silly things when the parents weren't watching us. But these days, I can waste hours just scrolling through videos on my phone. I mean, I do love that I can watch dolphins playing and whales in the ocean and puppies being cute. But after sitting there with my head in my phone for hours, I kind of think the old way of just going and finding something to do, it was better. I loved being a kid in the 80s and the 90s, and I sure hope that you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments what you did with yourself pre-internet and before smartphones. Don't forget to give this video a like if you liked it, and subscribe to my channel to show your support. Thank you so much for watching.